There are certain things you'd never want to hear in space. Uh-oh, Houston, we've had a problem. Fire. But these are all words astronauts have spoken while floating in the vastness of space. These are some of the most terrifying things astronauts have said in space. This was the last piece of audio taken from the soon-to-be crew of the Apollo 1 when a fire broke out, killing all 3 men. Just a heads up, this audio is pretty distressing. On January 27, 1967, the soon-to-be crew of the Apollo 1, Ed White, Roger Chaffee, and Gus Grissom were in the middle of a launch simulation. But things went terribly wrong, all thanks to an exposed wire. This test was crucial for preparing for their upcoming mission. They were fully suited up, strapped in, running through their checklist when Grissom noticed a strange smell. There was a brief hold in the countdown, but they couldn't pinpoint the source. They resumed their countdown, but just a few minutes later, a fire broke out. The astronauts' frantic voices were heard over the comm. Ed White yelled, "Fire!" And because of the design of the command module and the pure oxygen atmosphere, the flames spread incredibly fast. Ground crews rushed to help, but the thick smoke and toxic gases made it nearly impossible to reach the crew. It took several hours to recover their bodies, which were trapped in the melted materials. Uh-oh. 2 words you never want to hear during spaceflight. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger launched from Kennedy Space Center at 11:38 a.m. It all seemed normal at first, but just 58 seconds into the flight, things took a turn. 9 puffs of smoke were spotted coming from the right solid rocket booster. The problem was that the cold temperatures had messed with the O-rings, which were supposed to seal the joints, and this allowed hot gas to escape, causing serious damage. As the shuttle continued its ascent, a flame broke through the joint of the booster. The crew, unaware of the situation, received a command to go at throttle up. Commander Francis Scobie responded with "Roger" at throttle up. That was the last communication from Challenger. Just moments later, the right booster detached from the shuttle. Pilot Mike Smith's last recorded words were simply, "Uh-oh." The shuttle began to break apart in a catastrophic explosion, scattering debris over the Atlantic Ocean at an altitude of 46,000 feet. The crew cabin, which stayed intact at first, experienced extreme forces during the breakup. Investigations later revealed that some crew members might have actually been conscious after the explosion, as personal oxygen packs had been activated. Rick Husband, the captain aboard the Columbia Space Shuttle, was in communication with ground control during re-entry. The last message they received from him was, quote, "Roger," before he was cut off. The Columbia disaster is one of the darkest moments in NASA's history. On February 1st of 2003, Columbia was set to re-enter the atmosphere after a successful mission. The crew, including 7 astronauts, was busy preparing for landing as the entry flight control team took their positions at mission control early that morning. Everything was going as planned until about 8:44 a.m. when Columbia re-entered the atmosphere at a staggering speed. Unfortunately, the shuttle had sustained damage to its thermal protection system during launch. This damage allowed superheated air to enter the left wing, which began melting the aluminum structure inside. As the shuttle continued to descend, the crew didn't notice that the left wing was losing control because of increased drag, and around 8:53 a.m. things started to go wrong. The shuttle shed pieces of debris, which ground observers saw as these bright flashes in the sky. By 8:58 a.m. the shuttle systems began reporting failures, and just moments later, at 8:59:32 exactly, the communication with Columbia was cut off. What followed was catastrophic. The shuttle broke apart in the atmosphere. All 7 crew members lost their lives. Investigations revealed that the crew had likely experienced a quick depressurization before they could take any protective measures. Houston, we've had a problem. No, I am not misquoting Jim Lovell there. This one is often misquoted, mainly because of the Apollo 13 movie. Apollo 13 is one of the most famous space missions, but not for the reasons everyone was hoping. It was launched on April 11th, 1970. And it started off on track, but about 56 hours into the mission, astronaut Jack Swigert switched on some fans in the oxygen tanks to get better pressure readings, and suddenly there was this loud bang. and power began to flicker. And that's when Swigert calmly reported, "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." Fellow astronaut Jim Lovell then repeated this, saying, "Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B bus undervolt," whatever that means. And this problem just escalated quickly. The crew realized they were losing oxygen and their power supply was failing. With 2 of their fuel cells out, they were in serious trouble, and the mission's goal shifted from landing on the moon to just getting everyone home alive. And the lunar module, Aquarius, became their lifeboat. They powered it up to preserve the little oxygen and electricity that they had left. As the crew was looping around the moon, NASA engineers worked frantically to kind of find solutions. It was a race against time, but miraculously the astronauts did make it back to Earth on April 17, 1970, splashing down in the South Pacific. In 2003, Yang Liwei, the first Chinese astronaut ever to reach space during the Shenzhou 5 mission, reported this eerie knocking sound on his spaceship. While floating in the silence of space, he started hearing something unsettling, an eerie knocking sound. He described it as, quote, "someone knocking on the body of the spaceship, just like hitting an iron bucket with a wooden hammer." He went on to report that it neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship. He couldn't figure out where the sound was coming from. Curious and understandably a little freaked out, Yang peeked out of the porthole, hoping to figure out what was making this noise, but there was nothing. After returning to Earth, he even tried to recreate the sound, but there was no luck there either. I've always found this case very compelling, just the idea of floating around in space all alone and then hearing something you can't explain. That'd be terrifying. So what, or maybe even who, was knocking on the spacecraft? You'd think space would be silent since sound needs a medium to travel, like air or water. And some experts have said that if it was a knocking sound, something physical might have been hitting the spacecraft. As for what that may have been, who knows? Thank you. Tell everyone it happened. This was the last garbled message sent by astronaut Vladimir Komarov, who perished during the Soyuz 1 mission. On April 23, 1967, the Soviet Soyuz spacecraft was launched, carrying cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov. Things went wrong almost immediately. One of the solar panels failed to unfold, which meant there wasn't enough power for the spacecraft systems. By the time the capsule had completed 13 orbits, the automatic stabilization system was completely out, leaving the manual controls only partially working. And meanwhile, the crew of the Soyuz 2 was preparing for a rescue mission, planning to fix the solar panel, but thunderstorms at the launch site forced them to abort. Mission Control decided to bring Komarov back home after 18 orbits. As the capsule re-entered Earth's atmosphere though, Komarov communicated that everything seemed fine, stating the engine was running for 146 seconds. "Everything is going fine," quote. But then the main parachute failed to deploy. Komarov tried to activate a reserve chute, but that got tangled. The descent module crashed down at around 140 kilometers per hour. Rescue teams arrived to find the capsule on its side, engulfed in flames, with molten metal dripping from it. It was clear that Komarov did not survive. "They're on the moon watching us." These words were supposedly spoken by Neil Armstrong during his walk on the moon. Neil Armstrong made history when he walked on the moon. Of course, there are loads of conspiracy theories surrounding the moonwalk now, but here's one I hadn't ever heard of until today. After Armstrong landed, NASA supposedly lost transmission for about 2 minutes, and during this blackout, Armstrong allegedly sent a secret message saying, "These babies were huge, sir, enormous. Oh God, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us." I don't know, this one's definitely dubious and it's hard to find other information about it, but hey, if he really did see some strange stuff up there, that would definitely be really cool. The 3 men aboard the Soyuz 11 remain the only astronauts ever to die while still in space. The mission was launched on June 6th of 1971, aiming to dock with the Soyuz space station. The docking process was complex and took over 3 hours, and their mission lasted 22 days, during which time they carried out scientific experiments and live broadcasts. It was far from smooth sailing though. On day 11, a fire broke out in the station, which they fortunately managed to put out. On June 29th, the crew prepared for their return to Earth. Cosmonaut Vladislav Volkov joked with ground control to make sure they had cognac waiting for them down below. This would unfortunately be one of the last messages flight controllers received though. Soon after undocking from Salyut 1, radio communication went silent. When the capsule landed, rescue teams rushed to check on the crew, and unfortunately, they found all 3 cosmonauts, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Viktor Patsayev, and Vladislav Volkov, dead in their seats. It turned out that a ventilation valve had opened during the separation, causing a rapid loss of cabin pressure. This was fatal in less than a minute. The autopsies revealed that they died from asphyxiation and hemorrhaging caused by the vacuum environment. You hear that? That whistling sound? Now, this quote from astronaut Gene Cernan may not be as disturbing as the others on this list. Not really disturbing at all, to be honest, but take a listen to what he's describing. This is audio from the Apollo 10 mission in 1969. Cernan was piloting the lunar module and described an odd whistling sound he was hearing to fellow astronauts John Young and Thomas Stafford. They sound pretty calm and content there. I would have been incredibly freaked out. You're already in space, now you're hearing a weird whistling noise. Is there something wrong with the ship? Is there an alien floating around? I don't know. I'd be pretty freaked out. Shoe leather. That's a quote from astronaut Alan Bean. Not all that terrifying on its own, but shoe leather was the description Bean gave about an odd shiny thing he spotted on the surface of the moon while in space. He had no idea what it was then, and still has no idea today. Neither does anyone else, but you can be damn sure there are some eerie conspiracy theories, mainly that it could be some remnant of alien technology. Are there more mundane explanations? Sure, but you're not really here for those now, are you? Now, this list has been pretty dark, so I thought I'd close out with another quote from Alan Bean, who passed away in 2018, but spent a lot of his final years painting and reminiscing about the incredible experiences he had as an astronaut. Alan Bean left something behind on the moon during the Apollo 12 mission in 1969. His silver astronaut lapel pin. In the years after the mission, he'd think about that pin often, saying, quote, "When I look at the moon at night, think about that pin up there, just as shiny as it ever was, and someday, maybe somebody will go pick it up." All that said, I've been your host, James, and I will catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.